I still remember the day I realized that love doesn't always bring peace. It sometimes brings war inside your own home. My name is Daniel. I'm 45 years old, and for the last 6 years, I've been living a life that no man would wish even for his enemy. I married a woman not because I needed love, but because I saw her struggle. Her name was Sarah. She was a widow with a 10-year-old boy, Ethan. When I met her, she was working double shifts at a diner, tired, broken, but still holding on for her son. I thought maybe I could give her a better life. I thought I could give Ethan the father he had lost. For the first few months, everything was calm. Sarah smiled again, Ethan went to school, and our little house started to feel like a home. But slowly, things changed. Ethan grew distant. He'd slam doors, ignore me at dinner, and call me Daniel instead of Dad. I told myself he needed time. Maybe he just missed his real father. But as he grew older, the distance turned into hate. By the time he was 16, Ethan had changed completely. He started spending time with boys from the street, loud, careless kids who wore trouble on their faces. He'd come home late, smelling like smoke, with eyes that looked empty. I tried to talk to him many times. I told him I wasn't trying to replace his father, only to guide him. But he didn't want to hear it. One night I came home early from work and saw him sitting on the porch with those boys, laughing, drinking, and cursing loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. I walked straight to him and said, "Ethan, get inside. Now." He looked at me with eyes full of fire and said, "You're not my father. You don't tell me what to do." That moment cut deeper than any knife could. I had raised that boy like my own. I had worked nights, skipped meals, and even sold my truck once just to pay for his school trip. But that night, he looked at me like I was a stranger. His friends laughed, and that laughter echoed inside me like thunder. I didn't shout, I didn't fight back. I just turned around and went inside. But something inside me broke that day. A part of me died when he said those words. Days passed and he kept testing me, coming home drunk, stealing money from Sarah's purse, even lying about me to his mother. He told her I shouted at him, that I called him useless. None of it was true, but Sarah, blinded by her love for her son, believed him. She started defending him, arguing with me, saying, "He's just a kid, Daniel. He'll change." But he didn't. He only grew worse. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining hard and the clock had passed midnight. Ethan hadn't come home. Sarah sat by the window crying. I told her I'd go find him. I drove through the empty streets until I found him near an old warehouse with those same boys. They were smoking, laughing, and tossing beer bottles at the walls. When I stepped out of the car, the laughter stopped. "Ethan," I said calmly, "get in the car. Your mother's worried." He smirked. "Why don't you go home, Daniel? My mom doesn't need you." Something in his tone made me clench my fists. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not here to argue. Get in the car." He took a step forward, pushed me on the chest, and said the words I'll never forget. "You're nothing to me. Don't ever tell me what to do. You're not my father." The rain hit my face, but I couldn't tell if it was rain or the sting of humiliation burning through me. The boys around him started laughing again, and Ethan looked proud, like he had won. That night I didn't fight him. I went home in silence. But I decided he would learn what it truly meant to disrespect the man who raised him. The next morning I made a few calls. I had a friend in the local sheriff's office, someone who owed me a favor. I told him about the group Ethan hung out with, about the illegal stuff they carried sometimes. My friend listened quietly. By evening, the police raided that warehouse. They found stolen goods, alcohol, and small bags of weed. Ethan and his friends were taken to the station. When I reached the police station, Sarah was already there, crying. Ethan sat behind the bars, his face pale, his pride gone. He saw me and turned his head away. I didn't say a word. The sheriff told me that because Ethan was underage, he could be released with a warning if a parent signed for him. Sarah looked at me and said, "Please, Daniel, sign it. He's just a kid." But I stood there quietly and said, "He told me I'm not his father. Let his father come and sign." The silence in that room was heavy. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes full of regret, but I walked away. Sarah shouted my name, but I didn't stop. For the first time, I felt no guilt. I had done everything a man could, and still I was treated like nothing. Ethan spent 2 nights there before they released him to his mother. When he came home, he wouldn't look at me. The fire in his eyes was gone. He avoided me for days. I could see guilt building inside him like a storm. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch, silent. I sat beside him. He didn't say anything for a long time, then whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. He looked up, tears in his eyes, and said, "You were right. Those friends weren't good. I miss my dad and I didn't know how to let you in." His voice broke, and for a moment I saw that lost boy again, the one I once promised to protect. I wanted to forgive him right there, but something inside me said he needed to learn. So I stood and said, "Ethan, I raised you like my own, but you have to earn back what you threw away." For weeks he tried. He stayed home, helped around the house, went back to school. Slowly I saw him changing, not because of my anger, but because he had finally faced the cost of his arrogance. Months passed and life began to heal. Sarah smiled again. Ethan even started calling me Dad quietly, as if afraid the word might break. But it didn't break, it built something new between us. One night he came to me with his report card. "I passed," he said, smiling. For the first time in years, I saw pride in his eyes, not rebellion. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Now you're becoming the man I always hoped you'd be." He hugged me tightly, and I felt tears on my shirt. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." That night I sat alone on the porch and watched the stars. Sometimes, revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about teaching them the value of what they took for granted. I didn't ruin his life. I made him face it, and that became the lesson he would never forget. Now, years later, Ethan is in college, doing well. He calls me every week. Sometimes he says, "Dad, I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't taught me that lesson." And every time I hear that word, Dad, I remember that rainy night and how pain turned into understanding. Sometimes, the hardest thing a man can do is stay silent and let life itself become the teacher. I never wanted revenge. I only wanted respect. But when the world denies you both, sometimes you have to make it remember who you are. Days turned into months, but the silence between me and Ethan stayed like a quiet shadow that never left the house. Sarah tried to fill the space with normal talk, cooking his favorite meals, pretending things were fine. But I could see in her eyes that she was still afraid that the thin peace between us could break again any day. Every morning when I left for work, Ethan would already be gone for school. Every night when I came home, he would be in his room, door closed. Sometimes I heard music from inside, sometimes nothing at all. The house felt like two worlds separated by a thin wall. But slowly, something inside me started to change too. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired of being the man who gave everything and still felt like an outsider. I didn't marry Sarah for love, but somehow, in her and her son, I had found a kind of purpose. And when Ethan had thrown that purpose back at me, I had felt lost. One evening I came home late after a long shift. The kitchen lights were off. Sarah was asleep. But when I looked outside, I saw Ethan sitting on the porch again. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't listening to music. He was just sitting there, staring at the dark street. I stood at the doorway and said quietly, "You should get some sleep." He looked up, surprised that I had spoken. "I know," he said softly. "I was just thinking." I nodded and walked over to sit beside him. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The night was cold and the wind carried the sound of distant cars. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you still hate me?" I took a deep breath. "No, Ethan, I never hated you. I just wanted you to see what your words did." He looked down, ashamed. "I didn't mean what I said that night. I was angry and I thought those friends were my real family. I was wrong." His voice was trembling, and I could tell he had carried that guilt for months. I looked at him carefully. The boy who once shouted at me now looked smaller, quieter, human. "I know," I said finally, "but life has a way of teaching lessons we can't forget." He nodded. "It did. Those 2 nights in the cell I thought about everything. About how you used to fix my bike, drive me to school, help me with math. And I realized you didn't owe me any of that. You chose to." That word "chose" hit me hard. It reminded me why I had married his mother in the first place. Not because I was lonely, but because I wanted to give someone a chance. After that night, Ethan changed in small ways. He started helping Sarah without being told. He mowed the lawn, cleaned his room, even helped me fix the old car that had been sitting in the garage for months. Every little thing he did seemed to be his way of saying sorry without words. One Sunday morning, he came to me holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mom's at church," he said awkwardly. "Thought maybe we could talk." I smiled faintly and took the cup. We sat on the porch again, that same place where our silence had once been heavy like stone. He told me about school, about how he wanted to go to college for engineering. He said he wanted to build something that would make me proud. I didn't say much, just listened. But inside, I felt something finally healing. Weeks later, something happened that tested our bond again. One of Ethan's old friends, the same ones he used to hang out with, showed up at our house. His name was Rick, a troublemaker from the start. He came asking for money. When Ethan saw him, his face turned pale. Rick smirked and said, "Hey, man, remember who had your back before your fancy daddy came along?" I could see the rage in Ethan's eyes. But this time, instead of shouting, he took a step forward and said, "He's not my fancy daddy. He's my father. And if you ever come here again, you'll deal with me." Rick laughed but left. I stood at the doorway watching it happen. For the first time, Ethan didn't need me to defend him. He did it himself for me. Later that evening, he came inside quietly and said, "I meant what I said." I didn't reply. I just patted his shoulder and said, "I know." That was the day I forgave him fully. Not because he said sorry, but because he finally understood what being a man meant. Months passed again and our house felt alive. Sarah laughed more. Ethan brought his friends from school, good kids this time, and even helped me repair the old fence outside. Life was ordinary again, and for me, that ordinary was peace. But peace never lasts long in my life. One night, while driving home, I saw flashing police lights near the gas station. I slowed down and my heart stopped when I saw Ethan's car pulled over. I parked and ran toward the officers. Ethan was standing by his car, nervous. One officer looked at me and said, "You the parent?" I nodded quickly. "What happened?" He sighed. "Your boy was in the wrong place at the wrong time. His friend had some stolen items in the car. We're letting him go, but make sure he stays clean." Ethan looked at me, ashamed. "I swear, Dad, I didn't know he had that stuff. I just gave him a ride." I looked into his eyes, scared, honest, and young. I knew he was telling the truth, but I also knew life was testing him again. We drove home in silence. When we got there, he finally said, "You should have let them take me again. Maybe I deserve it." I shook my head. "No, Ethan, this time you didn't fail. You stood your ground, and that's what matters." He broke down crying. "I just don't want to lose what we finally have." I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Then don't. Just stay true to who you are now. The rest will follow." After that night, he became even more careful about his choices. He stayed away from anything that looked like trouble. I watched him grow, not just in age but in heart. Years passed faster than I expected. He graduated, got a job, moved to another city, but he never stopped calling. Every Sunday, without fail, I'd hear his voice on the phone saying, "Hey, Dad, just checking in." Sometimes Sarah would join the call, smiling quietly while I talked to him. Other times, it would just be me and Ethan, talking like 2 friends who had walked through fire together and made it out alive. The day he got married, he held my hand and said, "You taught me what being a man really means, not through words, but through the pain you made me face." I smiled and said, "You learned because you were strong enough to listen." When his first child was born, he called me again, crying with happiness. "Dad," he said, "I named him Daniel." That was the moment my eyes finally filled with tears I had held back for years. The boy who once told me I wasn't his father had given his son my name. Sometimes I sit on that same porch, coffee in hand, and look at the empty chair beside me, the one where Ethan once sat in silence. Life comes full circle. I didn't get revenge by hurting him. I got it by making him face himself. Every scar on my heart has turned into something meaningful now, because in the end I didn't lose a son. I earned one. And that kind of revenge, quiet, patient, and full of truth, is the sweetest of all. It was a Sunday evening years later. The house was quieter now. Sarah had grown older and I had retired from work. Life had slowed down, like an old clock that still ticks but no longer rushes. I spent most evenings on the porch, watching the sunset melt into the horizon, thinking about how time had taken everything but also given me peace. That day I was sitting with a cup of coffee when I heard a car pull into the driveway. It wasn't a familiar sound, newer engine, smoother hum. I turned my head slowly and my heart skipped when I saw Ethan step out. He was taller, broader, with a calmness in his eyes I had never seen before. Behind him came his wife, Emily, holding a little boy, my grandson. Ethan smiled when he saw me. "Dad," he said softly. The word still carried that same warmth, that same respect that once seemed impossible between us. I stood a bit slower than before and walked to him. The boy in his arms looked at me curiously. "This is Grandpa," Ethan said, smiling. "The strongest man I know." Those words hit deeper than any apology ever could. They came inside and Sarah's face lit up with happiness. We talked for hours about work, about life, about how he'd finally opened his own repair shop. He spoke with confidence, with maturity, with gratitude. And then, when the night grew quieter and Emily went to put the baby to sleep, Ethan stayed behind with me on the porch. The same porch where years ago he had shouted, "You're not my father." Now he sat beside me, eyes filled with reflection. "You know, Dad," he began, "I still think about that night, the night in the rain. I hated you so much back then. I thought you wanted to ruin my life." He paused, staring into the dark street just like he used to. "But you didn't. You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated forever." I didn't say anything. My throat was tight. He continued, "Those 2 nights in that cell, I thought my life was over, but that was the start of it. You didn't protect me from my mistakes. You made me face them, and that's why I'm the man I am today." He turned to me with a small smile. "When I named my son after you, I didn't just want to honor you. I wanted him to grow up knowing what kind of man I hope he becomes. Strong, honest, fearless." For a moment I couldn't speak. All the pain, the tears, the sleepless nights, everything I had endured for years, suddenly felt worth it. I reached over, placed my hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "You've become everything I ever wanted you to be, and more." He leaned forward and hugged me tight, like a son who finally found the father he'd been missing his whole life. I felt his heartbeat against mine, steady, real. After a while he pulled back and said, "You know, Dad, when I teach my son about right and wrong, I tell him a story. About a man who raised a boy that wasn't his blood but still became his father. I tell him that being a father isn't about who gives life. It's about who stands beside you when everyone else walks away." Tears welled in my eyes. I tried to hide them, but Ethan noticed. He smiled softly. "You still don't like showing emotion, huh?" I laughed weakly. Old habits die hard. We sat there for a long time, not needing to talk anymore. The air was calm. The stars were brighter than usual. And for the first time, I felt like life had given me back everything it had once taken. Before leaving, Ethan stood and said, "Dad, I'll bring Daniel Jr. next weekend. I want him to spend time with you. He should know where he comes from." As he walked back to his car, his little boy waved at me through the window. "Bye, Grandpa," he shouted. I waved back, smiling through tears. When the car disappeared down the road, I sat back on the porch, the cool wind brushing against my face. That same porch had witnessed my anger, my heartbreak, my silence, and now my peace. Sometimes life brings people into your world not to love you, but to test how much love you can give without breaking. I didn't win Ethan's heart through softness. I won it through strength. And as the stars filled the sky above, I whispered to myself, maybe this was the lesson all along. Revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about showing them what truth really feels like. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the night, and smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just a man who married a woman for her child. I was a father who had finally earned his son.